What if I told you that one of the greatest mysteries left unsolved after Avengers Endgame isn't about the Infinity Stones, or the multiverse, or even Thanos' true legacy, but about Steve Rogers himself? What really happened to Captain America after he made that final life-altering decision to go back in time and stay with Peggy Carter? Did he live a quiet life, far away from the chaos? Or is there a much bigger, more dangerous, and even heartbreaking story that Marvel has quietly left in the shadows? Think about it. Steve Rogers, a man who defined sacrifice, loyalty, and the fight for justice, suddenly chooses to step away. But did he really step away? Or did something far more complex unfold? That's the mystery we're diving into today. Because when you look closer, the Marvel Cinematic Universe left subtle hints, contradictions, and wide-open doors that suggest Steve Rogers' story after Endgame might not be as peaceful as it appears. And maybe, just maybe, Steve's ending wasn't an ending at all, but the beginning of a hidden chapter that Marvel hasn't fully revealed yet. Now, before we dive in, ask yourself these questions. If Steve truly lived a quiet life with Peggy, how did he return to the prime timeline as an old man at the exact right moment to hand Sam Wilson the shield? Why didn't we see Peggy's reaction to Steve reappearing in her life, despite the massive implications for the timeline? And, perhaps the biggest question of all, why did the Russo brothers and the writers of Endgame give two entirely different explanations for Steve's fate in interviews? These aren't just inconsistencies. They might be breadcrumbs pointing to a deeper theory about what really became of Captain America. So buckle up, because we're about to unravel Steve Rogers' secret destiny, a destiny that could reshape how we see Endgame and the entire MCU going forward. And we'll explore it in 3 arcs. First, how Steve's decision really worked within the timeline, and why his peaceful retirement might not be what it seems. Second, the possibility that Steve lived through hidden battles and multiversal threats we never saw. And third, what Steve's final role means for the future of the MCU, and why his story might not be over. Let's start with the first arc, because to understand Steve's fate, we need to revisit not only the final minutes of Endgame, but the very rules of time itself in the Marvel Universe. When Steve Rogers went back in time to return the Infinity Stones, the plan was simple: restore balance, fix the branches, and come back to the present. But Steve didn't come back. Instead, he stayed behind, choosing to live the life Tony Stark had always told him to get, the one with Peggy. To the audience, it was bittersweet closure. Steve finally got his dance. But for fans who think deeply, the questions piled up immediately. Because if the time travel rules in Endgame are consistent, then Steve staying in the past should have created a brand new branch timeline. Peggy Carter had already lived her life in the main MCU timeline, married, had children, ran S.H.I.E.L.D., and eventually passed away in Captain America. Civil War. So how does Steve suddenly reappear as an old man in the same prime timeline at the end of Endgame? This is where the contradictions begin. The writers of Endgame, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, said in interviews that Steve lived his life in an alternate branch and somehow traveled back to the main timeline as an old man. But the Russo brothers, who directed the film, said the opposite, that Steve had always been Peggy's husband in the main timeline, secretly living a life in the shadows all along. Two conflicting answers from the very creators. So which one is right? Or is neither of them giving us the full truth? If we take the writer's perspective, Steve's life with Peggy happened in a branch reality. That would mean old Steve had to cross back into the prime timeline somehow, maybe using Pym particles, maybe through multiversal travel. But this immediately begs the question, Why didn't Marvel show this? Why leave such a massive leap in logic unresolved? Unless the absence of an explanation was intentional. Maybe Marvel left this mystery open because Steve's journey after Endgame isn't finished. Now, if we take the Russos' version, Steve was always Peggy's husband in the main timeline. That sounds romantic and simple, until you realize the consequences. It would mean Steve lived decades watching events unfold. Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., Bucky's suffering, Tony's struggles, Thanos' rise, and he never intervened. Could Steve Rogers really just stand by? The man who fought bullies in alleyways even before the serum, the man who couldn't ignore injustice even when it cost him everything, are we really supposed to believe he could live a life of quiet ignorance? It feels almost impossible, unless Steve wasn't inactive, unless he did intervene, but secretly, which opens a massive possibility. What if Steve lived an entire hidden life as a shadow guardian of the timeline, protecting reality in ways no one ever knew? And this is where the theory starts to take shape. Because if you connect Steve's unexplained reappearance as Old Man Rogers with Marvel's recent obsession with the multiverse, it's entirely possible Steve wasn't just retired, he was recruited. Think about it. The TVA in Loki revealed that branches in time and alternate realities are actively monitored. What if Steve's decision to stay with Peggy put him right in the crosshairs of the TVA? What if Steve struck a deal, not to prune him, but to use him? A super soldier with first-hand knowledge of the Infinity Stones, battle experience against cosmic threats, and moral conviction strong enough to resist corruption. Who better to serve as a quiet protector of the sacred timeline? But even without the TVA, consider Steve's own sense of responsibility. He knows the Infinity Stones are too dangerous to leave unchecked. He knows the timeline is fragile. Could he really have gone back, returned the stones, and then just quit? More likely, Steve spent years ensuring that history unfolded correctly, that no one tampered with the stones, and that no unseen threats emerged from the cracks. Maybe his life with Peggy wasn't just domestic happiness. It was cover, a disguise for a man still working, still fighting, but in secret. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. Peggy Carter's history itself holds clues. In Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Peggy mentions her mysterious husband, the man she married after Steve disappeared. We never saw his face. We never got his name. Could it be that this was Marvel's long-term setup? That the husband was always Steve, looping back into her life? If so, then Steve didn't just change his own fate, he retroactively rewrote Peggy's story. But again, that means Steve would have lived through the events of the MCU twice, once as Captain America, once as Peggy's partner in the shadows. Which creates a paradox. How much did Steve influence history behind the scenes? And how much of the MCU timeline was shaped by his unseen hand? Now, imagine this. Every time something went wrong in history that could have disrupted the timeline, Steve was there, quietly fixing it. Hydra infiltrating? Steve nudges Peggy to build countermeasures. The Cold War heating up? Steve ensures S.H.I.E.L.D. takes the right path. The rise of new threats? Steve quietly tips the balance. He becomes not just Captain America, but a hidden guardian of time itself. And when the moment finally comes, after decades of secret work, Steve emerges in the prime timeline as an old man, ready to pass the shield to Sam, because his mission is finally complete. This theory not only explains the contradictions, it deepens Steve's character. Instead of simply retiring, Steve becomes a man who sacrifices in a different way, living an entire life in silence, carrying secrets no one else will ever know. fighting battles history will never record. It's not retirement, it's burden. And that's why when he finally sits on that bench in Endgame, there's a quiet heaviness in his eyes. Not just the weight of age, but the weight of everything he lived through in secret. But let's push this further. What if Steve's hidden life wasn't just about protecting history? It was about protecting the multiverse itself. Because Marvel has been setting up Kang, the Council of Kangs, and multiversal incursions. What if Steve encountered the earliest signs of these threats long before the Avengers even knew the multiverse existed? Think about it. If Steve returned the stones, he would have visited realities far beyond his own. He might have seen branching timelines forming, universes colliding, echoes of Kang's empire rising. Maybe Steve's true role wasn't just to close loops, but to make sure those loops didn't spiral into collapse. That would explain why Steve didn't reappear until after Endgame, because his mission stretched across decades, maybe even centuries of multiversal time. When he finally showed up as an old man, it wasn't because he was done living a quiet life. It was because he was done guarding something far bigger. His passing of the shield to Sam wasn't just symbolic. It was Steve saying, "I've done my fight, not just here, but everywhere. Now it's your turn." And here's the kicker. Marvel hasn't told us this because they don't want to. Not yet. They've left Steve's fate open, mysterious, contradictory, because they plan to return to it. Whether in Secret Wars or another multiversal saga, don't be surprised if we learn that Steve Rogers' story after Endgame was far from over. That he was more than just Captain America. He was, in his own way, the first secret guardian of the multiverse. If Arc 1 showed us that Steve's so-called retirement might actually have been a hidden mission, then Arc 2 takes us deeper into what that mission could have been. Because when you start connecting the dots between Steve's mysterious return, the nature of the Infinity Stones, and Marvel's multiversal groundwork, a picture begins to emerge. One where Steve Rogers' post-Endgame life wasn't just about Peggy Carter, but about defending the very fabric of reality itself. Let's start by asking a simple but overlooked question. What exactly happened when Steve returned the Infinity Stones? We see him leave with the case, we know he had the Pym particles, and we know he had to place the stones back in their exact moments. But let's think practically. Returning the Reality Stone means Steve had to face Asgard, and possibly deal with Frigga or even Thor. Returning the Soul Stone means confronting Red Skull, the ghost of his greatest enemy. Returning the Power Stone means sneaking past Quill and a Ravager crew. None of these tasks were simple. In fact, each of them could have spiraled into disaster. And here's the thing. Marvel never showed us any of it. Why? Maybe because those returns weren't smooth, and maybe because they led Steve into something far greater. Imagine Steve on Vormir, standing before Red Skull again. That meeting alone is dripping with untapped narrative weight. Red Skull was cursed to guard the Soul Stone, existing outside time and space. When Steve returns the stone, does that release Red Skull from his curse? Does it alter his fate? Or does it create a ripple that draws Steve into the deeper mechanics of the universe? We're told the Soul Stone demands a soul for a soul. But if Steve brought it back, did he undo Natasha's sacrifice? Did he trade something of his own? What if Steve, in returning the Soul Stone, gave up more than we know? Not his life, but his freedom, binding himself to a larger cosmic duty? Now, consider this. Steve Rogers was a soldier, yes, but his defining trait was his moral compass. The TVA, the stones, and the multiverse all represent forces bigger than any army. What if Steve became a soldier not of America, but of time itself? The old man we see on that bench in Endgame might not just be the result of years with Peggy. He might be the result of years spent fighting a battle no one else could see. Battles that weren't physical, but existential. Guarding the stones, negotiating with cosmic beings, keeping fragile timelines from collapsing. Here's where the theory stretches wider. Marvel's Phase 4 has hammered the idea that messing with time has consequences. Loki broke the timeline, Wanda tore holes into universes, Strange triggered incursions. But Steve's story sits right in the middle of all this. He tampered with time in the most dramatic way, choosing to stay behind. So why haven't we seen the fallout? Unless the fallout was Steve's hidden mission. He wasn't just allowed to stay in the past, he was tasked with stabilizing the aftermath of his choice. He became the silent protector, ensuring that one timeline didn't bleed into another. Think about Peggy Carter again. In What If? When Peggy takes the serum, the timeline immediately fractures. That story exists because of one changed choice. Steve's decision to stay with Peggy is the same kind of what if. It should have created a divergent branch. So why didn't we see that branch? Because maybe Steve himself kept it from diverging. His presence in the past wasn't passive, it was active correction. He wasn't just Peggy's husband, he was the invisible wall holding that reality together, a human safeguard against multiversal collapse. Now let's go even further. Steve Rogers lived through the 20th century again. That means he was around during the Cold War, during Hydra's resurgence, during the rise of the Winter Soldier program. But this time, he wasn't frozen. He was there. Are we really supposed to believe he sat back and did nothing while Hydra wormed its way into S.H.I.E.L.D.? That doesn't add up. More likely, Steve fought those battles in the shadows. He couldn't blow his cover, but he could quietly shape history. Maybe he gave Peggy just the right advice at the right time. Maybe he sabotaged Hydra projects before they took root. Maybe he even saved people who were never meant to survive, rewriting events in subtle ways that preserved the overall flow of time while preventing catastrophic divergence. And here's the paradox. Steve Rogers, the man who always stood in the light, became a ghost, a hidden guardian, a quiet soldier in history's blind spots. His shield wasn't on his arm anymore. It was in his choices, in the way he silently protected history without anyone ever knowing. That's why the world in the MCU still unfolded the way it did. Because Steve made sure it did. Now, let's connect this with the multiverse. Kang the Conqueror, as we saw in Quantumania and Loki, exists across realities. His variants build empires, fight wars, and cause incursions. What if Steve encountered early Kang variants during his stone-returning mission? Maybe he saw glimpses of timelines already corrupted by Kang's influence. Maybe he realized that his role wasn't just to put the stones back, but to keep those corrupted timelines from infecting his own. Suddenly, Steve isn't just a man who retired with his sweetheart. He's a man who carried the weight of preventing a multiversal war decades before the Avengers even knew what a multiverse was. And doesn't that fit Steve's character perfectly? He's not flashy, not arrogant, not interested in power. He just does the job. So while Tony Stark's legacy was innovation and spectacle, Steve's legacy could have been silence and endurance. A legacy no one ever knows about, because that's what it took to protect the world. But here's where things get chilling. If Steve lived through decades of hidden battles, then the old man we see in Endgame isn't just weathered by time. He's weathered by secrets. He carries knowledge that no one else has. He knows about threats that were never spoken of. And yet, he says nothing. Why? Because maybe telling Sam, Bucky, or anyone else would unleash dangers they weren't ready to face. The silence in Steve's final scene isn't just peace. It's the silence of a man who knows too much. Now let's revisit the Soul Stone again, because this might be the biggest clue of all. Natasha's sacrifice was permanent, or so we were told, but Steve's act of returning the stone might have given him insight into what the Soul Stone truly is. In the comics, the stone isn't just an object, it's a gateway to a pocket dimension, the soul world. What if Steve, in returning it, glimpsed that world? What if he saw Natasha, or others lost to the stone? And what if that encounter altered him forever? He might not have been able to bring Natasha back, but he would have carried that burden. Maybe part of Steve's hidden mission was making sure the soul world remained sealed, that no one else tampered with its mysteries. If that's true, then Steve's role wasn't just temporal or multiversal, it was spiritual. He became the last line of defense against forces no one else even knew existed. Imagine Steve Rogers, the boy from Brooklyn, standing not just against Hydra or Thanos, but against cosmic truths that could unravel existence. It reframes his ending completely. And yet, Marvel left this unsaid. Why? Because the MCU thrives on mysteries. They know fans will ask these questions. They know the contradictions fuel theories. And they know that Steve's return, whether in Secret Wars or beyond, will hit harder if his post-Endgame life is revealed not as retirement, but as a hidden war. So, what might that reveal look like? Imagine a future MCU project where the heroes face a multiversal collapse, and in the middle of it, they encounter an older Steve Rogers, not just the man who passed the shield, but the man who spent decades fighting in silence. His knowledge, his experience, his hidden battles, all of it comes to light. He's not just the symbol of the past, he's the key to the multiverse's survival. This brings us to an even bolder idea. Steve's old age might not be the end at all. What if, during his hidden mission, he found ways to extend his life not unnaturally, but through exposure to temporal energy, or through bargains struck with cosmic entities? What if the old Steve we saw wasn't the final Steve, but just one version, while another version of Steve is still out there, alive, fighting battles across timelines? That would explain why Marvel left his ending so ambiguous. Because endings in the MCU aren't endings, they're doors. And here's the emotional core of Arc 2. Steve Rogers' story after Endgame isn't just about what he did, it's about what it means. Steve was always defined by sacrifice. In the first Avenger, he sacrificed himself by crashing the plane. In The Winter Soldier, he sacrificed his reputation to expose Hydra. In Civil War, he sacrificed his place in the Avengers to stand by Bucky. In Infinity War, he sacrificed safety to keep fighting. And in Endgame, he sacrificed his place in time itself. His final sacrifice wasn't laying down his life, it was laying down his presence. Living a life of invisibility, of secrets, of battles no one will ever know, so that everyone else could live free. That's the true Captain America ending. And when you look at it that way, old Steve's smile on that bench takes on a new weight. It's not just the smile of a man who got his dance. It's the smile of a man who finally, after decades of hidden struggle, gets to rest. A man who bore the weight of timelines and stones and multiverses, and finally hands it all over to a new generation. That's why he tells Sam, "It's yours now." Because Steve's fight wasn't just for his own time. It was for all time. If the first arc revealed the contradictions in Steve's so-called retirement, and the second arc painted him as a hidden soldier fighting unseen battles, then this third and final arc asks the biggest question of all. What does Steve Rogers' fate truly mean for the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward? Because Steve's story doesn't just close a chapter of the Infinity Saga, it lays the foundation for the entire multiverse saga. And maybe, just maybe, Steve Rogers isn't done with us yet. To start, let's consider the emotional heart of Steve's decision. On the surface, it's simple. He finally allowed himself to choose personal happiness after a lifetime of sacrifice. But the MCU is never that simple. Marvel planted seeds, contradictions, gaps, mysteries that suggest Steve's choice was bigger than one man's happiness. His decision wasn't just personal, it was cosmic. And in storytelling, when something is left ambiguous, it's not a mistake, it's a setup. Now, if Steve spent decades as a hidden guardian of time, as we explored in Arc 2, then his reappearance as an old man isn't just an emotional send-off, it's a passing of the torch for the next stage of the battle. Sam Wilson inherits the shield not only because Steve believes in him, but because Steve knows the fight ahead will require a new Captain America. That suggests Steve foresaw what was coming. The chaos of the multiverse, Kang's arrival, incursions tearing worlds apart. Steve knew his era was ending, but he also knew the battle wasn't. So let's imagine what Marvel could be building toward. We know Avengers: Secret Wars looms on the horizon. We know it will pull heroes from across realities, echoing the epic comic event where universes collided. And we know Marvel loves to bring back legacy characters at just the right time for maximum impact. What bigger moment could there be than the return of Steve Rogers, not the young man we knew, but the seasoned warrior who spent decades fighting unseen wars? Imagine a battle where the multiverse is collapsing, and out of nowhere, Steve Rogers steps forward, not as the man out of time, but as the man who carried time itself on his shoulders. This would reframe Steve's role entirely. Instead of ending his story in Endgame, Marvel could reveal that Steve became the silent cornerstone of the multiverse. His retirement was never an ending. It was a pivot, a transformation into something larger. And that means when he comes back, he won't just be Captain America. He'll be something more. Maybe not even with the shield, but with knowledge, wisdom, and scars from battles across timelines. But what's the emotional weight here? Why does this matter to us, the audience? Because Steve Rogers has always been the embodiment of endurance. He's the man who gets back up, no matter how many times he's knocked down. He's the man who says, "I can do this all day," not because it's easy, but because it's right. So imagine what it means if, even after Endgame, even after supposedly choosing peace, Steve kept getting back up in secret, for decades, protecting a world that would never thank him, never even know what he did. That's the ultimate embodiment of his character. It's the purest form of Captain America. And that's why his return in Secret Wars or beyond would hit so hard. Because we'd realize he never stopped being a hero. He never stopped fighting. He just fought differently, in the shadows, in silence, bearing burdens that no one else could. And when the multiverse finally collapses into chaos, the revelation of Steve's hidden story would remind every Avenger and every fan what true heroism looks like. Now, let's go one step deeper. What if Steve's hidden mission wasn't just about stabilizing timelines, but about preparing the Avengers for what's next? Think about it. Passing the shield to Sam wasn't just symbolic. It was strategic. Steve knew Sam was the one who could carry the mantle into a fractured future. Steve didn't just pick Sam because of his heart. He picked him because Steve had already glimpsed what was coming. And he knew Sam was the leader the world would need. That moment on the bench wasn't just a goodbye. It was a calculated handoff. Steve, the soldier of yesterday, setting up the soldier of tomorrow. And what about Bucky? Steve's silence about his own hidden battles may have been to protect Bucky from truths that would have destroyed him. Steve always carried guilt over Bucky's suffering. Maybe he chose to bear the weight of the multiverse alone so that Bucky could finally live free. That's Steve's final sacrifice, not just his time, not just his presence, but his choice to shield the people he loved from burdens they weren't meant to carry. This also ties directly into Kang. Kang is the conqueror of time, the master of multiversal empires. But who better to stand against him than Steve Rogers, the man who secretly defended the timeline for decades? Kang represents control, domination, rewriting history to his will. Steve represents the opposite: choice, free will, protecting the flow of history, not bending it. Their conflict would be thematic perfection: the conqueror of time against the soldier of time. And don't forget the Soul Stone. If Steve truly interacted with the Soul World, then he may hold knowledge no one else does. That could be vital in secret wars. The Soul World might even serve as a key battleground or sanctuary when universes collide. Imagine Steve revealing to the Avengers that he's been there, that he's seen what lies beyond the veil of death, that he knows how to navigate a place where souls and universes intertwine. That revelation would shake the team and us as viewers to the core. Now, let's think about Steve's final fate. Does he die quietly in his bed? Does he fade away after passing the shield? Or is there something bigger? Marvel has a chance to give Steve an ending that is both epic and intimate. Picture this. In the climax of Secret Wars, universes are collapsing, heroes are falling, chaos reigns, and Steve Rogers makes the final sacrifice. Not young Steve, not the soldier with the shield, but old Steve, the man who bore decades of hidden struggle. He steps forward one last time, not to fight with fists or strength, but with knowledge and willpower, anchoring the multiverse, holding it together in a way only he can. His last words echo his first, "I can do this all day." But this time, it's not about punching an enemy. It's about holding reality itself together. That would be the ultimate Captain America moment. And when it's over, when the dust settles, Steve Rogers would truly rest. Not because he abandoned the fight, but because he saw it through to the end. His ending wouldn't erase Endgame. It would deepen it. It would show that Steve's choice to stay with Peggy wasn't selfish. It was strategic, sacrificial, and ultimately essential to the survival of everything. That's why Steve's story after Endgame matters. Because it's not about erasing his goodbye. It's about understanding that goodbyes in the MCU are never what they seem. Steve's life with Peggy was real. His dance was real. His peace was real. But layered underneath that peace was a mission bigger than any of us imagined. A mission that connects directly to where the MCU is heading. And when Marvel finally decides to reveal that truth, it will reframe everything we thought we knew about Captain America. So the next time you think about old Steve sitting on that bench, don't just see an old man who retired. See a warrior who fought a secret war, who carried cosmic burdens in silence, who gave the world not only his youth, not only his prime, but his entire life. See the man who was more than a soldier, more than a symbol, more than a captain. See the man who became the unseen guardian of time itself. And here's the beauty of it. Whether Marvel ever tells this story outright or not, the ambiguity is the point. Steve Rogers' ending is left open because his spirit lives on. Not just in Sam, not just in Bucky, not just in the Avengers, but in us. The idea that doing the right thing, even in silence, even without recognition, is the greatest form of heroism. That's the legacy Steve Rogers leaves behind. That's why he'll always be more than just Captain America. And with that, we come to the end of our theory. Steve Rogers' story after Endgame may never have been retirement at all. It may have been his greatest mission yet, hidden, secret, but essential. And when the time is right, maybe Marvel will show us the truth. Maybe the first Avenger will also be the final Avenger. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden fate of Steve Rogers, make sure you hit that like button. It really helps us out. Share this video with your friends who still argue about what really happened to Cap, because trust me, this theory will blow their minds. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more storytelling breakdowns and theories that go beyond the surface of the MCU. And if you want to support us directly, so we can keep creating these massive deep dive theories, consider dropping a $25 super thanks. Every single one of those goes directly into helping us research, write, and produce content like this. It means the world to us, and it lets us keep delivering the kind of storytelling you deserve. So until next time, remember Steve Rogers' greatest lesson. You don't need to be the strongest, or the fastest, or the flashiest. You just need to get back up. Again, and again, and again.